We are Chris Lee and Blake Lovell of Southeastern 14 here to react to the release of the 2024 football schedules. Of course, the dynamic that's interesting there is the blowing up of the divisions and also the addition of Oklahoma and Texas. So lots of moving parts here, Blake. And my initial reaction is I keep looking at schedules team by team and I go, man, that team really got a tough slate. That's a raw deal. And then you look at the next team and it feels like you reach the same conclusion for every team.
Well, I think we're probably going to do a live stream on this on Thursday night. Don't hold us to that for 100%, but I think we're going to add a lot more to just what we're going to say in this particular video. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot you could go to. I mean, you could look on Twitter right now, and every team could probably tell you why the SEC screwed them and all this different stuff. I mean, that's the fun we have with the schedule sometimes, but. I mean, look, there's when you add two programs like this to the mix, everybody is probably going to look at their schedule and start to say, well, gets a little tougher there, gets a little tougher there.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, I mean, initially, again, just keep in mind, this is completely random. Like, I'm just kind of picking and choosing here. We could talk about every team schedule. You know what? We may eventually talk about every team schedule, even a year in advance, in all honesty. We may do a video on everybody's 2024 schedule. Who knows? But I think just some of the things that stand out. Georgia has a pretty tough slate, in my opinion. I think it just kind of you look at it. You've got Tennessee on there at home, you got Auburn at home, who we expect Hugh Freeze to turn things around. So you keep that game with Auburn. I think that was something we talked about, right? Depending on what happened there, so you do keep that game. Does Florida can they turn things around to where that game, maybe is more interesting too? If you assume all that, and then you got Mississippi State in there too at home, but then you go to Alabama, you go to Texas, you got to go to a Kentucky program that we think is still, in the right direction. You go to Ole Miss. So that's one that stands out to me. Like I said, I know other fan bases can look at and say our schedule is, tougher or whatever, but I'm just pointing out ones that I see. Another interesting tidbit I thought South Carolina, no Georgia, no Tennessee, no Florida. So, you kind of think about what we're used to seeing in some of those rivalry games over the years. South Carolina has, none of those three are on the schedule. And so I find that kind of fascinating. And then just to kind of keep this shorter, boy, Vanderbilt. Yeah, you don't get
Yeah.
Georgia, but you still get Alabama, you get Texas, or certainly you still have Tennessee there. Got to go to Auburn, like we said. I think that's going to be more difficult, just given where Auburn's probably going to be at a year from now. Got to go to LSU, Kentucky. Like, yeah, I know you can look at maybe some of those games and say, well, Missouri's on there and that kind of stuff, and at least you don't get Texas and Oklahoma, or you don't get a Georgia added to the mix. But I mean, Alabama and LSU are college football playoff teams next season, I would think, and same could be said for Tennessee, and who knows with Texas. And so that's just some of my initial kind of thoughts on it.
Yeah, I think one of the weird things for me is seeing some of these games that have been staples of schedules for forever disappear. For instance, you mentioned Vandy. Vandy and Georgia have played every year. I looked this up since 1968, except the COVID cancellation in 2020, which might have had to do with kicking situations more than it did a disease. But in any case, and revolts because of
Well, I
that.
think
But in
Vandy's
any
probably
case,
fine with not having Georgia on the schedule. I'd
well, I was
be
going to
jumping up and
say,
down.
but
So,
that's been one that's been played every
yeah.
year. I mean, who was president in '68? LBJ, I guess. I mean, that's wild to think. Okay, that game was scheduled to play every year from '68 on. I think they didn't play in '67 for whatever reason, but a bunch of years before that too. So there's some disappearance of games you don't think of necessarily as rivalries, but yeah, they're gone, and that's going to be weird not seeing certain teams on certain team schedules every year. One thing that caught my eye, like I've got three teams with the fourth in mind that, like, if I could circle for the foreseeable future, is like their roster might be completely different 3 or 4 years from now, but I feel like these three or four teams are really set up to be a fact. Like if we fast forward to 2028, I feel like team X, Y, and Z are all going to be factors. If you could pick three teams, which would you pick?
Oh my goodness. I want you to give me your list first because it's going to take me a second on the spot trying to figure out exactly who that would be. But
Well, let me tell you. You give me a reason why you would disagree. I feel like those three teams are Alabama, Georgia, and LSU.
Well, hold on a second. What's the
Uh,
criteria again? I think that's what I
but
was confused about.
the criteria is we don't know what the team's roster is going to look like in say 2028 or 2029. Okay. But
Okay.
just based on the history and tradition of the and trajectory of the program, like if you wake up in 2029, you don't know who any of the players on the team are going to be, but you're guessing you don't want to face that team then. What
Oh,
would be the
okay.
programs you would
Oh,
pick
okay. Well,
that you
yeah,
don't
that
want to
that
face?
that would be the three. Yeah, I would say those three. Yeah.
And Tennessee might have an argument, and Florida not right now, but maybe, and maybe Texas A&M could say the
I
same.
think
Here's what I'm getting
Tennessee's
at.
the closest. Yeah.
Yeah, you look at Alabama's schedule, and it's got Georgia on there, and it's got LSU on there next year. It's also got Tennessee on there next year. Um, the point I'm making is that you're starting to see some of the more heavyweights on here. And why I went to 2029. With the transfer portal, we don't know what rosters are going to look like. We have more of an idea of what they'll look like for 2024 than 2029. But you see Alabama's got Georgia and LSU and Tennessee on there and Oklahoma for what that's going to be worth. We don't know just at the moment, given the change in coaching and the way it went with Brent Venables last year. But I looked down this, and that's one place where my eyes got caught first, was just looking at that and going, okay, if Alabama's going to retain its spot at the top of the food chain, it's going to be taking on the other teams that are squarely in position to vie for all that.
Yeah, I forgot to mention that. I was actually because I think it was that was one of the main themes of last night and people talking about this morning is sort of Alabama and was the SEC trying to stick it to Alabama, for the 8 game, 9 game schedule fiasco, if you want to call it that. Ultimately deciding on the 8. And yeah, I mean, no doubt, I think Alabama's schedule, you look at it, having to go to Tennessee, got to go to Oklahoma, got to go to LSU. Yeah, I mean, just Georgia on there, like we said, it's a given. And just having those two teams play each other in the regular season, yeah, I mean, there's no doubt that I think Alabama's got a pretty tough slate there when you look at it from that standpoint. Now, again, you do feel like you have winnable games, but even the Auburn game, right? I mean, that's one, like we said, who knows where Auburn's at a year from now and what exactly the projections are. I would think that they are higher than they probably are right now. And even some people think that they're maybe on the verge of a top 25 top team this season in Hugh Freeze's first year. So, yeah, it doesn't look easy for the Crimson Tide by any means. And like you said, it's just nice to and we look, it's a 1 year thing, so we don't know what it's going to look like in 2025. But for at least for one season, just to see the schedule set up the way that it is, not just for Alabama, but having some of those heavyweight type matchups and renewing some of the old rivalries, right? That's what probably a good transition to in Arkansas, which
Yeah.
gets Texas, gets obviously still has A&M on there, but gets the Texas game, and you've got still got games against Tennessee. I mean, look at Arkansas's home schedule in 2024: LSU, Ole Miss, Tennessee, and Texas. Now that will be a hot ticket, I think, in Fayetteville for those 4 games specifically, because man, that is quite a schedule for home games. And again, to get Texas at home in the Longhorns' first season in the SEC, that will be a lot of fun, I think, for the Hawks. So.
I'm looking down. I'm trying to say, did any team miss all of Alabama, LSU, and Georgia? And everybody's got at least one of those three on their schedule, but I'm looking at Missouri. Missouri only caught Alabama of those three.
Okay.
Look, nobody's schedule's easy, but Arkansas, Auburn, Vandy, Oklahoma at home, Alabama, A&M, Mississippi State, South Carolina on the road. Just not catching LSU and Georgia in there, might be something, not nor Texas nor Tennessee.
Yeah.
That might be the one. Again, nobody's schedule's easy, but if you're looking just for a quick reaction of like, whose schedule would you most like to walk into right now? That might be the team I'd pick.
Yeah, I mean, I think again, like we said, we could probably dive into the ins and outs of some of these. Maybe on the opposite end of that, we talked about Florida as an interesting team and kind of where the program's at right now and what their expectations are. I mean, you got to go to Tennessee, you got to go to Texas. You still have LSU on there. You get A&M.
Georgia.
Again, I
Yeah.
mean, you got Georgia neutral. So that's like we said, for Kentucky that's trying, or excuse me, for Florida that's trying to get back into that upper echelon and be a team that could in a year or two or however many years it takes to try to contend with what Georgia's built and what Tennessee is rebuilding. Yeah, I mean that's not an easy path to get there. And remember, who else is on the schedule, Chris? It's not in the SEC, Florida State.
Miami and
So
Florida State.
I mean, so it's like that's what you just have to remember for Florida, I think. And so that path to get back where you want to go, ooh, it's not just the SEC schedule, it's the overall schedule, and that's a pretty intimidating slate just from what we see right now, I think, for the Gators. So
Is somebody trying to run Billy Napier off?
I don't know. It's
I mean, that
I
schedule, good
mean,
grief.
well, yeah, I mean, I think, that they could step forward this year. But I think we've said with Florida, I think it's just it's rebuilding in a lot of areas. And I mean, like we said, this is the new SEC, right? And if you're going to be a national title contender, if you're going to be an SEC East contender, which Georgia and Tennessee are pretty much, are the two teams there. Maybe Kentucky moves into that category. It's just, yeah, I mean, you've got to beat these teams, and it's just for a Florida to get all those ones on the schedule. Because, like we said, if you even just look ahead in like an expanded college football playoff type format, I mean, you can circle a lot of teams on these SEC schedules and say, yep, that could be a team that makes the playoff. And that probably is going to be a team that makes the playoff. And yeah, Florida's one of those teams, got several on there for sure. So
Yeah. Again, I want to emphasize with the portal, it's harder to size up schedules ahead of time than it's ever been, and I guess that's the recurring thought. But again, I go back to what I said earlier. You're pretty sure that 3, 4, 5 teams that are poised to be at or near the top of the national picture, regardless. And that's again the overriding theme I take when I look at these is like who's got LSU, Georgia, and
yeah.
Alabama. And then the Florida point that you made was interesting. And anything else in here stand out to you as a team that really got it stuck to them, or maybe got it relatively easy compared to the others?
Yeah, as you said, it's hard to always call anything relatively easy. I think, I mean, Tennessee's schedule is interesting because they have the rotation where they have Alabama, Florida, Kentucky all at home, but we know why, right? It's because they're playing all of them on the road this season. So it's just, I think it's nice the way it kind of, at least it kind of filters that way next season is to have all those teams at home, and then they've got to go to Oklahoma. Like we said, I think they're still, you're still trying to figure out maybe some things there, and you do have to go to Georgia, which we know, and game at Arkansas, at Vanderbilt, which as we know usually is a home game for Tennessee, and so I don't know if obviously got Alabama and Georgia on there, and I'm not going to say that's easy by any means, but maybe the way it shakes out, it is something that it's just kind of having to go to Oklahoma, although we just don't know what to expect maybe from Oklahoma at this point, but I mean, I can't look at any of these schedules and just say, "Wow, they are just in great shape." I mean, it's
Yeah.
hard to say that because there are lots of things you could pick apart. And like I mentioned, I know there are probably certain teams we have not gone in depth on the schedules. We're not going to go through all 14 in depth right here on this single video. But yeah, I mean, I go back to like Georgia and Florida and Vanderbilt. Those seem to be among the toughest. I think you can throw Alabama in there. Um, but the rest, I don't know. I mean, just because you're adding Texas and Oklahoma, every team plays them, as you said a minute ago. And so it's almost like you feel like you're just adding another game in there that you're going to circle and say, well, that's a tough game. Right. And so I think when you add another game like that, in addition to the rivalries that are built in with certain teams that you're going to play every year, I don't know that I look at a lot of these and say, man, that's just completely easy by any means. So,
The SEC took a lot of heat for not going to the 9-game schedule, and I've got 2 more things I wanna mention before we get out of here, but just as you're going through it and talking, this occurs to me. You kinda see where they're coming from when you look at these slates, because you look at everybody's and go, "Man, I wouldn't have to face this one or this one or this one," and, yeah, you add a ninth game to that schedule, and somebody's picking up a Georgia or an
yeah.
Alabama or a Tennessee or an Auburn that could be, or a Texas A&M that could be on the way up, or a Florida that could be rebuilt, and you kinda you may not like it, it's not the outcome we wanted, but you kinda understand it too, Blake.
Yeah, I get it. I mean, that's why I think the vote I'm sure was a very fascinating scenario, because it is. You're trying to, like we talked about, it's the path to a bigger college football playoff. Um, and we know the SEC is going to hold more pieces of the pie. I mean, it is what it is. And so that's one of the reasons you expand the playoff is to not have two teams from the SEC, maybe in a 14 playoff, which you're going to pretty much have every year, it seems like. And, but yeah, I mean, it's just kind of a situation where you look at this. And by the way, we didn't mention this, but I think everyone knows that it's on our on our minds in terms of looking at the schedule. But you think there's going to be anybody in College Station whenever Texas comes to town? I think that may
Oh
be
boy,
quite an interesting one there for the Texas A&M Aggies, who I don't, I don't hate their schedule. In all honesty, I
no.
mean they got Arkansas, LSU, Texas at home, and Missouri. So I think some of your toughest games are home. Now they got to go to Auburn, but then it's like Florida, Mississippi State, South Carolina. Not knocking those teams, but I mean, but we say all that to say that that's assuming A&M jumps back up to a double digit win team this season and pushes that forward, but we don't know for sure if that's going to happen. So
That's kind of the jumping off point of the other thing that caught my eye with this, Blake, is you mentioned A&M and Texas. That's one that you figured would be a natural to put on there. Okay. And of course, Texas and Oklahoma. I look at this and I feel like some schools, okay, they've got a natural rival. Some schools have got more than that. Like for Tennessee, for example, okay, you got Vanderbilt in state. They've been playing that game for forever. That one's on there. Tennessee and Vandy kept together. Two other rivalries you think about with Tennessee that at times over the last 30 years, you could say this is the rivalry that is the biggest game on their schedule. And then in another decade, you could say this is the rivalry that's the biggest one on their schedule. Those would be Florida and Alabama, respectively. And the Alabama one kind of went away for a while in terms of being a rivalry game because Alabama dominated for so long. But last year, Tennessee wins that one. I think is going to bring an element of that back. So I look at Tennessee, and it's got the three games that in different ways you would consider their rivals on there, not to mention Georgia, which is another one that they played forever. So I look at that. Alabama, of course, Auburn's going to be on the schedule. LSU may be the biggest game that Alabama's played in a number of years. They're on the schedule. We mentioned Tennessee before. That's been a big game for Alabama from Alabama's point of view. Tennessee won what 5 or 6 in a row at one point when Phil
yeah,
Fulmer was there. So I think the league, and of course, Florida, Georgia, is one that's been played in Jacksonville forever. Arkansas, LSU, a little bit of a rivalry there, I think. I think the league, and of course, Ole Miss, Mississippi State, I think the league did a pretty good job of keeping on all these games that fans have circled on their schedule for decades as a part of things going forward, at least for 2024.
yeah, not an easy thing to do when you're trying to balance all these schedules and figure out exactly who to put where and all that. Yeah, it's not easy. I think from that standpoint. That's like I mentioned earlier. That's why it seemed like South Carolina. It probably is bizarre to kind of look up and not see
Florida.
the Florida, Tennessee, and Georgia
Yeah.
on there. It's just a bizarre thing because you're just not used to it. So I think that was the one that I thought that caught my eye the most in terms of teams just having a such a different schedule based on what we're used to seeing. And so for sure, and I mean I'm trying to look at just some other kind of interesting tidbits here before we wrap up. But it's like, okay, who gets Georgia, Tennessee, and Texas all on the road? And that's Florida, which I guess technically Florida doesn't get Georgia on the road, but away from home. Let's put it that way. Mississippi
Right.
State. Mississippi State gets Georgia, Tennessee, and Texas all on the road, in addition to an Egg Bowl game at Ole Miss. I think that's a pretty rough road slate for Mississippi State. I'm trying to see if there's anyone else. I'm looking at Auburn, by nature of the rotation of the schedule, gets both Alabama and Georgia on the road. I think they're the only team that gets that. Looking down here, yeah, I'm pretty sure that's the only team that plays both those teams on the road. So that's at least interesting to note. I guess if you want to throw LSU in there with some of the, well, I mean, you have to with some of the top tier teams. You kind of see how that's grouped. We mentioned Alabama. They got to go to LSU, Oklahoma, and Tennessee. So yeah, I mean it's so fun to look at these schedules because we are projecting a year ahead, but as you talked about a few minutes ago, you kind of know what to expect and who's going to be where. But that's where you get some of these wild card teams of an Auburn. All of a sudden, their program starts to, ascend. And is it the same for, for other teams like a Kentucky maybe? We see what Tennessee's doing. Is Florida, can they get there? And what to expect from pretty much all the other SEC West teams. So, man, yeah, this is going to be quite an interesting 2024 season.
All right, I'm going to drop one thing in here, and I don't have the answer to it. I just asked people to drop this in the comments, and we'll call this the hotel owner's dream. There are a few fan bases in this league that travel. Georgia travels. Tennessee's been known to travel. Alabama's been known to travel. I mean, it's probably just about all of them to some degree, other than maybe Vanderbilt. I guess we could argue degrees of difference here, but I want to know that the hotel owner's special. What hotel owner is gonna in what city is gonna make out the best? And maybe a better way to put it, the ticket scalper special, because not only do you have demand from the home fan base, but when Alabama's bringing 20,000 people to your town or whoever, that's going to make the ticket prices go up a little bit. I want to know which town is going to benefit the most from out-of-town guests and line the pockets of ticket scalpers most with this 2024 schedule. I don't have an answer. I'm sure you can make several compelling cases, but I want to get a little audience participation here. Maybe do we call it the ticket scalper special? I don't know what we call it, but whatever we call it, I think that would be an interesting angle.
You could pick a lot of rivalry games, of course.
Right.
But if let's just say sort of the newer games that we haven't seen in a while, right? I mean, I think Texas going to Arkansas, that's a huge ticket. I mean, and look, remember, we know there are so many huge tickets. We're not just saying these are the only games, but I mean, A&M hosting Texas is a huge ticket. I think Alabama going to Georgia, huge ticket. But it's a matter of who gets in the building, right? Who gets in there with all of that. Georgia going to Texas, that's a huge ticket. Just the nature of that game itself, I think, just adding that to the rotation. And there are a lot of other ones too, like I mentioned, but those would probably be some of the initial ones that really stand out. And yeah, I mean, it's just it's a fascinating slate of games. And it's just going to be a lot of fun, I think, to see how these things unfold. So,
yeah, here's the bet. This thing is like drinking from a fire hose as you look at it, because somebody's going to shout out us in the comments like, man, this thing was obvious that you should have talked about and you missed it. And they're probably going to be right.
Yes. We're not doing all 14 schedules. All right, let me just give you an idea. Here's some of the stuff we've got in the works. I mean, we're madmen sometimes. We may wind up doing a 2024 schedule, quick sort of video for everybody. We may end up doing that because it's the summer and we don't, we're kind of previewing the 23 season right now, but we may do that for fun. We're also, Chris, going to count down. I've just made this decision. We're going to pick our top 10 games on the 2024 schedule. So we're going to put that out in the next couple of days. I've already made that decision because I think that'd be a lot of fun. Well, we're doing it because it's going to be great to have the debate on what people think, the top game is going to be. I already have my pick for the top game, but we're going to see what everyone else decides to choose on that. But we're going to do that. And again, we may do a live stream Thursday night. Blaine probably going to join us just to go back over this again and get Blaine's thoughts on this entire schedule. So, yeah, madness, I tell you.
Yeah, put in the comments the happiest ticket scalpers live in and give us your city, because I really am interested to know, because that dynamic of traveling fan bases and what that does to demand for games is always going to be fascinating.
Hey, I forgot to mention too, Texas and Oklahoma fans. We're going to do a separate video for you. It's sort of your introduction to the SEC. I know we talked about them a little bit in this video, but we are going to do a separate one kind of looking at Texas and Oklahoma schedule. So be sure to hit that subscribe button so you can find that video on the channel.
Oreo is getting restless in my background. You may hear that. I think that means it's time to move on to the next thing. So with that, I think you can see him in the very bottom corner of the screen.
He's ready for 24. He's ready.
He is. He's ready to talk Texas, Oklahoma, and we're going to give him that. The best way to catch all our videos is to hit the subscribe button. If you want to enable notifications, that lets you know when we put stuff up. We're still in the middle of college baseball, as we do this in the middle of June. The College World Series is starting this week. We cover football, basketball, baseball, wall to wall. Anyway, thank you for watching our content here. He's Blake Lovell. I'm Chris Lee. We'll see you soon with more content at Southeastern 14.